Hello and welcome to today's FatTel Daily video. Today we're talking about a really exciting topic called GDP. I'm going to explain why that is quite fascinating in a minute. But Nick, welcome mate. Thank you very much for hosting these videos while I've been away.
Yeah, no, it was a pleasure. And I don't think anyone has ever considered GDP to be exciting. So yes, we are trying to be funny in that on that opening.
Yeah, I know, but it's kind of, I guess it exudes your free market philosophy, doesn't it? Do you just want to explain what GDP is?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different ways of thinking about this, and it can be recorded in multiple different ways as well. But the basic idea is just how much spending or transactions happening in the economy. So every time you spend money, every time the national economy has some sort of transaction or exchange, there's different ways of measuring exports and imports here. There's gross national income, GNI as well. And so there's a few different measures. But just the basic idea is that in our lives, in our economies these days, how much we consume, how much stuff we have, all of these sort of things. GDP is the best measure we have. GDP and things like life expectancy and all the things we care about, the quality of our homes and how much we eat and all that. That sort of all gets bundled into GDP. And there's this very close correlation between how happy people are and GDP, obviously. And right now, GDP is probably the biggest topic on the political agenda, but it's sort of hidden as well. Basically because we have so much debt in the world that GDP needs to keep growing so that we can afford to pay that debt. We've got so much government in the world, so much government spending and tax, that we need to keep growing GDP in order to pay for all that. So trying to keep GDP growing is the big topic.
Yeah, but really, I mean, this is it stands for gross domestic product, and it basically means how much money is sloshing around the country or the economy at any one time, isn't it? But the point you're making in today's... Go on, sorry.
That's kind of there's the distinction between nominal GDP and real GDP. So nominal is the amount of money being spent in transacting, whereas if you call it real GDP, it's the actual stuff. So if we double the money supply tomorrow, nominal GDP would double.
Gotcha.
And real GDP wouldn't change. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, you hear politicians and economists touting it all the time. Oh, this is growing, and that's like a marker for how positive any economy is, right? But the concept that you talk about in today's FatTel Daily is good and bad GDP, suggesting that some activity might actually be making us less well off or even poorer. Now, you kind of highlight this with quite a funny story, but just before we go into that story, because you made me laugh yesterday when I spoke to you on the phone about it, but what do you mean by good and bad? Like, why is there a distinction?
Yeah, I've spent lots of time moving around the world over the last 10 years or so, and it's made me realize that there's all these things that people have to do, because I've had to do them so often because of moving, that are actually just an inconvenience to our life. Like, we don't actually want to do them. And there's all these jobs that people do that we don't really want to employ or to have business with that person, to be their customer. But we sort of have to because of the way the world's structured, or the way the law is, or the way the regulations are, or the way the big companies want to deal with us. And it made me realize that there's a lot of GDP, a lot of our government, a lot of our personal spending we don't actually want to do. We would rather not do it. We'd rather be doing something else with our money. And that got me thinking about, well, how much of our economy is actually bad GDP, the sort that we don't actually want? A good example is a mortgage broker, right? I can understand why people go to a mortgage broker, and it's a good idea to do so. But do we really need that person doing that job? Isn't that their job really just because the banking industry is incredibly inefficient or overregulated or whatever it is? Do we really want to go to a financial advisor, a tax advisor, or are we only stuck doing that because we have to, because the law is very complicated and all these things are very complicated? How much of our GDP is like that? How much of our GDP is really just people annoying us, making us jump through hoops, making life inefficient for no reason that we don't actually benefit from, that we don't actually want to be doing? How many trips to government departments and offices and administrative centres do we have to do? Visa applications, immigration agents, how much of that is actually how we would want to spend our life if we didn't actually have to because the laws are better or the the businesses were more efficient or whatever it might be. And I'm coming to the conclusion that there's a hell of a lot of bad GDP out there, of GDP that makes us less
Like
well off.
unproductive. Basically doesn't add any value to anything. It's just unproductive.
Yeah, or even my key point though is that it's not just that it's a pain in the neck and a waste of money. It's that you miss out on how you could have spent that money. So you miss out on the good GDP. You know, if instead of having to pay a mortgage broker, you know, how much cheaper would the whole process be, and therefore I could spend money on oranges or apples or iPhones or whatever it might be. You know, if I didn't have to spend that day going to Vic Roads or whatever it is, you know, if I didn't have to spend the days dealing with stupid real estate agents, how much time could I have spent, you know, taking my kids to the theme park or whatever it might be? So you're not just slowing down the economy and making things inefficient, you're also missing out on what you would have done instead. And this is, by the way, the key point of free market economics is called the seen and the unseen. So, you know, if you don't spend money on the mortgage
fallacy,
broker,
right?
yeah, that's right. So it's Frederick Bastiat. If you didn't have to spend your time and effort doing things that aren't really necessary, you can see that you would no longer do that. But the unseen is, well, what would you have done instead? How would you have spent that money instead? And one of the key points in the article for today is that all of these people, there's an anthropologist called David Graeber who wrote a book called BS Jobs. And all of these people are working BS jobs, all these accountants that are interpreting impossibly, unnecessarily complex rules, all these mortgage brokers, all these whoever else. What could they be doing instead that would still be generating GDP, but it would be doing something that we actually want rather than something that we're stuck doing that we don't actually need and would rather have instead. And the most important point in my article today is that is how an economy grows. That's how prosperity grows. It's by eliminating jobs that we don't actually want done, that we're stuck doing for silly reasons, usually legal reasons. And those people do something new instead. And that's what we gain. We gain something we want and we lose something we don't want.
Or something that maybe makes society or just better, basically, or but more makes people's lives more valuable to them, like how they want to live it.
Yeah, the issue with that is people don't agree on what is like makes society better. Some people believe, and I go into this in the article, some people believe it's great to go down to the local administrative office from the government and spend your day there filling out forms. Some people like that because it's like a status symbol, you know, it's like I've started a business, you know, and everybody look at me, I'm registering my business at the local office or whatever it is. When that can just be done online in Australia. And I've got family who are like that. They love the inefficiency, they love the bureaucracy, you know, and so they might think that's a good idea, a good way to spend our money. But, you know, in a free market, people are free to choose to do that if they want to. They can spend their time and their money doing that. I don't want to. They shouldn't be forcing me to.
Well, tell us the story, Nick, because it was quite funny. Like, it involves the Archbishop of Canterbury. It's just a personal story that kind of brings to light and shows what you're talking about.
Yeah, this sort of story is, as I said earlier, a good example of what happens when people try and move around different countries, because they encounter all these problems even more. If you remain in one country, you encounter sort of the growth in bureaucracy, the new OH&S rules, new health and safety rules, you know, the new rules for banking and so on. So you kind of get it slowly and you're used to it. But if you move around, you discover just how ridiculous all these rules are, because, you know, one country does things one way and the other country does things the other way. And like if they just both did it the efficient way that the other country does, life would be so much better. So my mum has this bank account that she opened about 22 years ago, and she never really lived in Australia for more than a few months. So she lost all sort of trace of this bank account. And she's been trying for decades, for a decade, to basically shut the account and get the money out. And at least to update the address, because they've got the old address for her. But it's basically proven impossible. And so she eventually asked my sister to become a power of attorney for the purpose of shutting this account. So my sister traveled to Germany, generating lots of GDP. They got the power of attorney, which generated lots of GDP with the German notary and lawyer. And then she traveled back to Australia. And then the bank said, well, actually, we don't accept foreign foreign power of attorneys, even though they told us they would. And so they decided to try and get an Australian power of attorney set up in Germany, or notarized in Germany. And so my sister generated some GDP by employing a particular lawyer whose name we definitely don't want to reveal, because Well, she told my sister that in order to get an Australian power of attorney in Germany, she would need a public notary who certifies documents, appointed by the Archbishop of Canterbury to do it in Germany. And obviously, there is no Archbishop of Canterbury in Germany, let alone notaries who have been certified by the Archbishop of Canterbury. But my sister didn't quite realize this, so she spent some time searching for them in case there's some sort of weird historical reason why German notaries might be certified by the Archbishop of Canterbury. There aren't any, so my sister contacted the embassy. So this is, again, generating lots of GDP because you need lots of embassy staff to be answering requests like this, don't you, right? It generates lots of good GDP. So the embassy staff said, well, obviously the Archbishop of Canterbury isn't going to be certifying anything, which was a shorthand way of saying it, right? Because they didn't say the Archbishop of Canterbury doesn't certify notaries in Germany to do it. And so the lawyer picked up on this and wrote back and said, you misunderstood my request. The Archbishop of Canterbury himself doesn't need to certify the documents in Germany. It needs to be a public notary certified by the Archbishop of Canterbury. So we're literally at the point where the lawyer is telling us that the Archbishop of Canterbury could be notarizing documents. It's just totally absurd. Anyway, so it all got into a big stalemate. We got nowhere. And in about a month's time, I'm heading to Europe to give all this a go myself to see if I can get well, I definitely won't be searching for a notary who was appointed by the Archbishop, but
Yeah.
I'll be trying to sort out probably with a different lawyer to get all of this done.
But I guess the point is, it's a lot of running around, a lot of money spent that didn't need to be spent, that otherwise would have been spent on maybe more productive things. How does that sort of... So that's one micro story of your individual life, right? And your family's life. But multiply that by tens of thousands of families and other people did. Like, how does this sort of affect productivity in the wider economy, especially when it comes to like a country's global competitiveness, for example?
Yeah, especially in Australia, we've got this regulatory burden that's pretty absurd in many ways. In some ways, Australia is very efficient, and this is true of all countries. They do things in ways that are incredibly efficient, and you think, why don't we do this in Australia? And then you go, to somewhere else in the country. You go, how can they be so inefficient? Like, how can they be doing this in such an inefficient way? So in Australia, it's incredibly easy to open a bank account. In the UK, it took about 2.5 months. All right, so the traveling around and seeing different countries, different ways of doing things makes you realize how much more productive we could be, how much more good GDP we could have instead of all this bad GDP. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, if we can get people doing things that are actually useful that we want, generating good GDP, we become better off. It's possible to argue that the actual total amount of GDP might not go up. It could even go down if we sort of decided we're going to make borrowing so easy and simple. We don't need mortgage brokers anymore. It would be bad because all these mortgage brokers wouldn't have a job. But productivity would improve because we'd be doing things that we want instead. And so all of this is playing out in Australia, especially right now, because we've got the government. We've got, I think it's record jobs growth in the government sector, in the non-private sector under the current government. Yeah, it's kind of a sign that we're headed for a boom in the wrong sort of GDP, right? Because all these people, I don't think they're going to be making us better off. I think they're going to be bugging us with stupid rules and stupid hoops to jump through, coming up with all sorts of ways to make us less happy, basically, to make the economy less efficient and generating less of the GDP we want. And how many businesses that we would buy things of will go down in a blaze of regulations and red tape over the next few years because of all these public sector employees. The energy sector is the obvious example here. How many businesses will they kill in the energy sector because of the renewables push? So it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem. And there's a weird irony in all of this because the reason that they're doing this is to try and pursue GDP growth, right? If they hadn't employed all these people in the public sector, we might be in a recession. And it's the same for immigration, by the way, which is the biggest topic in the media at the moment in pretty much all countries. The reason they're pursuing out of control GDP is because it gooses. Out of control immigration is because it gooses GDP. It grows the economy to have more people in it. So it's a good example of, well, are we really better off with all those immigrants coming in? In many cases, yes, but I'm sure some of them no. So you can't just say we need more GDP, therefore we should do whatever it is. I'm saying you've got to be careful about whether you're generating good or bad GDP. Are these public employees? Are they good immigrants? Who's coming in? Who's doing what? And statistics don't distinguish in any way between good and bad GDP, right? We just count the total. That's inherent in GDP. So there's no way of knowing whether our growing economy is actually improving our standard of living or not. Whether we're actually becoming happier and better off and prosperous and getting things we want, or whether we're actually growing the economy but making ourselves more miserable.
Fair enough. Final question. How do you relate this to the investment markets? Do you take this into account at all when it comes to valuing companies or anything like that?
I do in terms of where I might be investing. So if a country has taken on some sort of productivity priority and is making life easier and is deregulating, that's worth investing in. So I interviewed your corresponding publisher in Argentina, so our sister business's publisher in Argentina, and he's pointing out how Javier Milei over there is basically doing all the right things, as far as I see it, by freeing up the economy and allowing more and more people to have positive GDPs. So, for example, he's abolished the rent controls in Buenos Aires, and as a result, the rental market's booming, and more people are exchanging GDP that's actually mutually beneficial and making everyone better off. That was not happening because of the rent controls before that. It's the opposite of what they're proposing in places like the UK and the US. So you could relate specific examples back to specific companies, such as the net zero regulation on energy. If countries go against net zero, it's worth investing in those companies that are operating in those countries, or going to, or trying to. So I guess there are specific examples as well. But I think the big purpose of Fat Tail Daily today is to make people realize that there's a reason why we've had this, how many decades of economic growth in Australia, but it feels like everything's just become a pain in the neck to do.
Yeah, well, it's definitely not a pain in the neck to think about these things, and have a read of your piece today, Nick. Thanks for coming on and talking about it. If you guys would like to read what Nick has to say, head over to the article. There's a link direct to it in the description below. Feel free to sign up for our daily insights, and have a happy and prosperous weekend full of positive GDP. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.